Okay, I've wanted to play with one of the Intrepid cameras for quite a while. They've attracted a lot of attention in the industry over the last few years. And I found out recently a buddy of mine had a Mark II. And, well, I'd love to play with one of the Mark IIIs or the Mark IVs, but I didn't know anybody to steal a Mark III or IV from. So I talked him out of his Mark II for a couple of weeks. And now that I've been playing with it, I thought I would do kind of a usability review comparison between it, which is like a 3-year-old camera, and my Nagaoka 4x5, which is probably a 30-year-old camera. So I'm not going to go into all the minutia and all the little details of how to set it up and put it back, fold it back up. That's available everywhere. I just want to give, like I say, more of a usability review and maybe some idea of which one might fit your style a little bit better. So to get the boring technical details out of the way, the Intrepid weighs in at 1 kilogram. The Nagaoka weighs 1.15 kilograms, so you have like 2.2 pounds versus 2.6 pounds, while the Intrepid has a footprint of about 180 by 200 by 80. The Nagaoka has basically the same footprint, but it's 60 millimeters thick when folded versus 80. Frankly, I don't think the size-weight difference between the two is of any significance. Construction-wise, the Intrepid is made out of high-grade plywood, which is actually a really strong, from an engineering standpoint, is a really solid choice. Synthetic Bellows, the annotated aluminum uprights. Now the pinion gears and the knobs are all plastic. They all seem to work well. Where on the Nagaoka, it's made out of finger jointed hardwood with brass fittings that are chrome plated. The rack and pinion is all metal, leather bellows, cute little leather handle on top. So completely different construction techniques. But I want to point out early on here that pretty much any picture you take with either camera, or pretty much any picture you want to take, you're going to be able to capture with either camera. They both use the standard lens board, easily found. One of the other differences, the Intrepid has a rotating back on it. Now, I've never been a big fan of rotating backs because they're usually complicated and they add weight. But this one is rather well done. It's real elegant, and it works really well. To rotate the back on the Nagaoka, it has the standard clips that you pull out, and then you just flip the back up and put it back down. So let's talk about bellows for a second. Both of them have about the same maximum bellows extension. You have 320 millimeters on the Intrepid and about just over 300 on the Nagaoka. The big difference is the minimum bellows extension, where probably the widest lens you're going to be able to use on the Intrepid is around 75 millimeters, and that might be pushing it. Because the back standard moves on the Nagaoka, and I can slide this forward, you can use a 60 millimeter lens, usually use a 60 millimeter lens, and still keep the bed out of the field of view. So if you're a wide angle guy, that could be a significant advantage. Now, one of the other things I wanted to point out, one of my few complaints about the Nagaoka is when you crank it all the way out, you can see, even with the small 75 millimeter lens, how much vibration there is here. With the Intrepid, with the heavier base, you crank it all the way out, even with this heavy 210 millimeter lens, it's a lot. Now, what you're seeing move there is actually the tripod mount down here. If I had a wider base on top of my tripod, I don't think you'd have nearly that much movement. So from what I can tell, the Intrepid is going to handle a heavy, longer lens much better than the Nagaoka would. So one of the comments I've heard or read about on the Intrepid is that the fit and the finish was kind of rough. This one is finished very well. I would say they did a really good job. I mean, it still looks like plywood, but it's plywood. And from a structural standpoint, plywood is probably superior to the hardwood as far as rigidity and resistance to warping and all that stuff. So I have no objection to the plywood. The only issue I have found is when putting in the film holder, it can get stuck before it gets all the way in. and you got to pop it out just a little bit and make sure you get it right in place. Where on the Nagaoka, you know, it just slides right into place. Now, part of that difference may be the 30-year-old camera, things have kind of worn down and stuff slides in and out better. So, not a huge issue. Let's talk a little bit about the movements. They both have more than adequate movements. The front on the Intrepid, to get the swing, you just swing it. You just swing it around, and you've got a front shift. To do that on the Nagaoka, you've got to loosen these nuts, and then you can kind of warp the front standard to get your swing. The Intrepid has a much greater swing than the Nagaoka does, though I'll say on the Nagaoka I've never needed more than what it's provided. The biggest difference is that the rise and fall and then the front tilt on the Nagaoka are independent from each other and can be adjusted very precisely. Now, I know on the newer versions they've addressed this, but on the Mark II, it's a little tricky if you're going to be doing a lot with, you know, a front swing and you want to do a rise or a fall. It's just a little trickier than it is on the Nagaoka. As far as back movements go, you basically have no back movements on the Intrepid, where because this back standard slides forward, you can slide one edge further forward than the other, and you can get some rear swing on it. You also have the option to tilt back or tilt forward. I guess you can tilt forward on the Intrepid if you wanted to. But so other than that, those are the minor differences in movement. As far as setting the camera up, I didn't bother to show you that. That's available everywhere. You're going to get used to either camera, and you'll get them set up and get a lens mounted in roughly the same amount of time. There isn't a significant difference there. So really, what is the summary? What is the high-level takeaway on all this? I see the Nagaoka as a work of art by itself. I mean, finely crafted, traditional design, a lot of emphasis on the elegance and the form, fit, and function. I see the Intrepid as more of a workhorse. You know, you got a heavier construction. I can tell you this, that if I knew that my tripod was going to fall over, well, first I'd keep my tripod from falling over. But if I couldn't keep the tripod from falling over, I would be much less concerned about the Intrepid. The plywood construction is going to be a lot more sturdy and take a lot more abuse. I know of a case where a guy had a very similar camera to the Nagaoka that got blown over in the wind, and it turned into kindling. I mean, it's just not that sturdy of a camera. So the other issue that you need to look at, of course, is the price. And sometimes we put too much emphasis on the price. I think it's more important to get the tool that does what you want and a tool you're comfortable using. But as far as price goes, and it's hard to find good pricing on the Intrepid because there's not a lot of used ones for sale, but what I've been able to figure out is it's somewhere around $250, between $225 and $250, where the Nagaoka or one of its clones is probably going to set you back $500 or $600. Like I said, to sum it up, if you're a wide angle guy, I think the Nagaoka is going to offer a significant advantage. If you're staying close to the trail, you're in the studio, you want very precise movements, very precise adjustments, I think the Nagaoka has a slight advantage. If you're hiking through rugged terrain and you're going to be a little harder on your equipment, you don't want to risk dropping a $500 camera in the creek, you'd rather drop a $250 camera in the creek, and you're going to be using longer lenses, I think there's a significant advantage to the Intrepid. So as always, we're always interested in hearing from you. Our contact information is down below, and we'll always appreciate it when you tag us on social media.